Well, welcome everybody. We're glad you could join us here for yet another Monday morning masterclass. And my good friend and colleague Scott Burleson will be doing most of the talking today. This is on. Well, go ahead, Scott. Why don't you tell them what you're going to tell them today, and we'll dive right in here.
Today, we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, something I've definitely spent a lot of time obsessing about, which is jobs to be done. But we're just going to hit that top level. Just hopefully I can impress upon everyone how practical this is, how useful it is for innovation and new product development. But we're going to start out today in the Blue Help. And you see the Blue Help Knowledge Center. And let's say you've forgotten everything we've talked about today. And where do you go for many blueprinting topics? We go to the Blueprinting Center. And I'm going to type in jobs. And you can see here are 3 articles coming up. What is the origin of jobs to be done? What is a jobs to be done? And how is jobs to be done used in practice? In particular, how is it used with new product blueprinting? So we're going to just quickly peruse these articles for you to look at later. What are the origin of jobs to be done? And I'm going to talk about this in our presentation here shortly as well. I think it's highly relevant. In fact, we're going to tell this same story here shortly about how Clayton Christensen worked with McDonald's. So we've got lots of links to other articles within new product blueprinting as well. Within the second article, what is a job to be done, which is a customer's goal, objective, or problem to be solved. I find objective to be one of the more difficult words to say for some reason. I get tongue-tied over it. But then again, we have, so what is a job to be done? What are some attributes of a job to be done? It begins with a verb. It's a statement of action. It's a statement of what a customer seeks to accomplish. Great place to start. And then finally, certainly last but not least, how do we use jobs to be done in practice? And a lot. You see all the different links we have to various blueprinting articles. For example, here's one. Actually, it's a little preview into what we're going to do in a couple weeks in our next masterclass session. How do you use jobs to be done to create a scope within step 1? How do you use jobs to be done within discovery interviews? We're also going to touch on that here this morning very briefly. Anyway, so that's what we have there.
And
Now,
Scott, as you're getting ready to get into that, one thing that you've impressed upon me that I like is a lot of folks in the B2B realm, we just start thinking about our product, don't we? That's the main thing. And you're going to help us move our minds more into the customer space and think about their jobs to be done, which I think is really healthy.
Dan, it is all about that. It is all about that. So getting started with jobs to be done. This is one of the most useful topics I've run across in my time in new product development. So much so, it's really become just a focal point of my career. Back from the time when I was developing new products, new tractors, I should say, with John Deere, to ever since, working with clients in, I'm telling you, every possible industry you could imagine, helping them to innovate. So this is today's masterclass, getting started with jobs to be done. So now we'll look at, now this agenda, you'll be able, instead of just imagining it, you can actually see what our agenda is. The origins of jobs to be done, the first 2 laws, and how we use it within discovery interviews. So again, imagine that your company makes tents. When you get to work every day, that's what you're thinking about. You're thinking about tents, waterproofness, stretchiness, breathability. You and your friends over lunch, maybe even talk about things like hydrophobic properties. But what do customers think about? You know, maybe they think about relaxing, you know, so when they're going camping, a nice glamping experience, they're resting, recuperating, maybe cold drinks, looking up at the stars. Maybe it's about playing cards with the family or just being outside. That's what they would use your tent for, right? But what if they think about it differently? What if they think about going into the backcountry? What if it's more about seeing lots of remote places, covering lots of miles? So it's still a tent, but now we're talking about the mentality more of a marathon runner instead of somebody just being one with nature. So in either case, they're not thinking about the tent at all, but they're thinking more about how that tent helps them to accomplish something. See, so our perspectives are different. Our perspectives are different, and that it's almost like when we're only focused on our products, it's like we're blind. Is here we are, we want to innovate, and what are our leaders doing? Our leaders are making plans for the future. They're investing in factories. We go to do our work, right? We're designing things, we're writing marketing plans. We leave this idea of the job. And finally, with the job, we're able to actually see the world the way our customers do, through what they are trying to accomplish. Because at the end of the day, there's so many things they don't care about, we think they care about, like our brand and our technologies, when really all they care about is getting their job done. And when we see it this way, I mean, maybe it sounds cold, but it's really, our customers have a transactional relationship with our product. They hire it to accomplish something. And one of the most powerful questions you can ask is, for what job does a customer hire your product? Now, to understand how this way of thinking came about, I think it's useful to go back in time a little bit, back to Clayton Christensen, who unfortunately passed away this past year in 2020. But he was doing a project with McDonald's, who wanted to improve their sales of milkshakes. McDonald's, marketing geniuses, product development geniuses, but despite their best efforts, their sales were still flat. So they engaged with Dr. Christensen's team, and they started doing some work. And they first noted that lots of milkshakes were sold in the morning. They were sold between the hours of like 6 and 8 a.m. They were sold often to a person who was by themselves. They were driving to work. They had a long, boring commute. They often did not buy anything else except just the milkshake. So this profile was coming together. And so Christensen and his team, they decided to look a little deeper, and they started interviewing these customers. Now, they didn't use these words per se, but essentially they were asking them, for what job are you hiring this milkshake? And what other products are you hiring for this same job? And one of these competitive products was a bagel. But remember, they're driving to work, and it's hard to spread cream cheese on the bagel, and you get crumbs everywhere. Another product they might hire would be a Snickers bar, but they would feel very guilty afterwards, and then it wouldn't keep them full very long. Some would hire donuts, but you can't eat just one donut. So all of these products were inferior to the milkshake. And so with this, they were finally beginning to see this world through the customer's eyes, and it changed their perspective. And with that, with seeing it accurately, then they could actually create a new product that the customers did care about. In this case, they came out with smoothies. Now, were they healthier or not? Well, that's debatable, but they had bits of fruit in them. The customers could still just hold them with one hand. It took a long time to eat. So it really accomplished the job better than the milkshake. So this is a pretty famous case study, and he wrote about in his article called Marketing Malpractice, the Cause and the Cure, which I recommend reading. So let's go to some definitions. What is a job to be done? A job to be done is a customer's goal, objective, or a problem to be solved. And customers, they are the ones that are going to define what success means, as opposed to us, the product developers and innovators. So a job to be done is a customer's goal, objective, or their problem to be solved. Now, a job statement, it begins with a verb. It's a statement of action of what they want to accomplish. Learn a skill, prepare a meal, finance a home, find a lost item. It's a statement of what they want to accomplish, and so it's always going to begin with a verb. Now, an important attribute of a job statement is they are much more stable than products. They're much more stable. It's not that jobs don't change, but they're much more stable than products are. If we think about a relatively new product of WebMD, now when I'm teaching innovation or new product development and BSc courses, I'll often ask, what does somebody hire WebMD for? And somebody invariably says, well, it's to convince you have cancer when you just got a canker sore or something. Because it does seem they go to the most extreme of what your possible issue could be. But we hire WebMD to diagnose an illness. Now, how long have we been diagnosing illnesses? As long as there have been people on the earth, the job of diagnosing an illness has existed. So the jobs are much more stable over time, and products will always continually evolve. Now, one of the key attributes or key things we want to think about with a product or with a job to be done is, again, asking this question: for what job does somebody hire this product? And I think coffee in particular is interesting. And I also like to ask this question when I'm teaching: for what job do we hire coffee? Now, you might say, I hire it to stay awake. I might hire it to hydrate myself. But what if we even altered the question a little bit? For what job do we hire Starbucks coffee? Now we might have different jobs like feel intelligent or feel cool or whatever it is. But the point is that we think we have this simple product, a cup of coffee. But depending on who you are, you might purchase that coffee for a completely different job. So it's a very useful, it's always a very enlightening question to ask. Now, for just a moment, I always like to tip my hat to kind of the founding fathers of jobs to be done, of which there are many, to be fair. But for our modern concept, it's really Anthony Ulwick and Clayton Christensen, who I've mentioned earlier. There are other folks as well, certainly Lance Bedencourt and quite a few. And I was fortunate that I actually worked with Tony and Lance at a previous career stop, and I owe them a debt of gratitude that can't be paid. It's just, this has changed really the way that I see the world. And let's look at how this really begins. Jobs to be done begins with this statement: a customer hires a product to accomplish a job. A customer hires a product to accomplish a job. This phrasing is absolutely loaded. I'm not sure how, there are no unnecessary words there, and every one is meaningful. So I'd like to break this phrasing down and explain why I say that. A customer. This is the who. Who are we innovating for? When I am beginning a new initiative with a client, a question I like to ask is, whose life do you want to make better as a result of this new product? And more often than not, that's not a question they can answer easily, but it's always a useful question. Who are we innovating for? Whose life do we want to make better? Who are we creating value for? Hires. I referred to this earlier, but this tells us our relationship between the who and this thing they are purchasing, the product. Now, when we say product, clearly that can be a service. It's irrelevant whether it's something we can touch or whether it's software and digital or if it's a service, right? A customer hires this service or this product to do what? To accomplish a job, to accomplish what it is that they think to do. In this case, our example of a tent, maybe we say that what job does it do? Maybe it helps keep you, stay dry in the rain when camping. We'll come back around to that. In general, it's very useful to use tangible examples when we're trying to understand what products are, what jobs are, and what customers are. Next, now that once we've identified a job to be done, it's time to improve it. And that brings us to the second law. To make something perfect, we must remove everything that makes it imperfect. To make something perfect, we must remove everything that makes it imperfect. We remove every imperfection. And I want you to remember this. I'm going to tell a little story, which may or may not be true, but it's very, very illustrative of this second law. Now, if we go back in time a little bit, the statue of David, it is the centerpiece of the Renaissance. The commission for the statue, it was handed to Michelangelo by Leonardo da Vinci himself, after many others had not done so well. The statue was originally going to be on the roof of the Palazzo Vecchio, but at the end it was too big and too heavy, So they placed it out front. Now the Pope came by, Pope Julius came by to inspect it. And there was Michelangelo next to his statue, the statue of David. And the Pope asked Michelangelo, how did you create something so perfect? And the master thought about that for a moment. And he said, I simply carved away everything that was not David. I carved away everything that was not David. So to make something perfect, we carve away, if you will, everything that makes it imperfect. So imagine he's carving, the rocks are falling, the big rocks, the little rocks. First he's got the big hammer and chisel, and then he goes to a smaller hammer and smaller chisel. So we go from big rocks falling away to smaller rocks falling away. And then finally, he ultimately gets to the polishing tools. And now we're just left with the dust. The final imperfections are so small. It's just dust filling the room with these errors. This is what I want you to keep in mind when we think about how we help a customer to get a job done, because it's their objective to accomplish that job as well as they can. We'll even say as close to perfection as we can get. So these rocks, these are the job errors. These are the imperfections to help a customer to accomplish their jobs better. Now, some job errors are going to be big, the big ones. Some job errors are going to be small. So let's pull back out of the story and let's go back to our tent example. Imagine you make fabrics. So B2B, imagine you make fabrics, you sell those fabrics to tent companies. And you're studying this job of shelter in a tent while camping. You want to create this perfection. Well, what are some imperfections? Well, maybe if the customer gets wet because of the rain, maybe they get wet due to their own breath, the condensation. When they're in the tent, maybe if they're getting cold or if they're getting hot, there's not enough space for their gear. The tent falls down in high winds, or if it's difficult to pitch, or if it hurts their back. We're all getting older. If it hurts your back to actually crawl into that tent. All those are imperfections. So what we want to do with a customer, we want to uncover those imperfections in an interview, and we'll talk about that briefly. Although I bet a lot of you are making this connection with the discovery interview already. And we want to restate those job errors as job statements, which gives us outcome statements. Now look at this list: wet due to rain, wet due to condensation, cold, hot in the sun. From here we have, from wet due to rain, we have the outcome statement: minimize the likelihood of getting wet due to rain. For cold, minimize the likelihood of being cold. For difficult to pitch, minimize the time to pitch the tent. And we can talk about all the rules for outcome statements later, but essentially we have a verb, we have something measurable, and then we have an object. But you should recognize that these outcome statements also meet the definition of job statements, because it begins with a verb and it's a statement of what the customer seeks to accomplish. So in the end, after we ultimately launch our product, which tent, or actually our customers, I should say, release their product, which products are they going to choose? They're going to choose the one that addresses those needs the best. They're going to choose the one that addresses those outcome statements the best. Okay, so now let's look at how this syncs with discovery interviews. Okay, so we're going to reflect on law number 2. Again, to make something perfect, we must remove everything that makes it imperfect. What are the errors? What's going wrong? What problems are we concerned about? For a customer, what is keeping you from executing your job perfectly? And for better or worse, the image I have is a bulldog in a discovery interview. If you've ever, I don't think I've ever seen a bulldog gnawing on a leg, but there's just that tenacity that you're just going at it, this obsession with what are these things going wrong. Now in discovery interviews, here's something that, an image that should be familiar to you, the discovery noteboard. In which case you have your scope in the upper left-hand corner. Well, this should be the job to be done. If you're sitting down with a customer to do a discovery interview, you should have that job to be done written right there where the scope is. And when we're teaching blueprinting, I always encourage folks, even if you're practicing, even if you're just practicing, always write the job statement in that scope. Take that very small bit of time to do that. Because when we're there with the customer, there's no doubt about what our topic of conversation is. It's using a tent for shelter while backpacking. And sometimes a question we'll get when we teach new product blueprinting is, well, what if a customer says they don't have any problems? Something's gone wrong. Because the customers you're talking to, if they are doing that job, well, 100% of the time, there's something between their current state and what a perfection is. So if they cannot tell you, if you have customers that, and you're studying this job of using a tent while using a tent for shelter while backpacking, if they're doing that, 100% they will have some problems they can share with you. So also in the discovery note board, we have our first section is problems, which is another way of errors, imperfections. What are the challenges that you're having when using a tent for shelter while backpacking? Okay, so this is pretty much my introduction of jobs to be done for us today. But let's do a quick review. A customer hires a product to accomplish a job. A customer hires a product to accomplish a job. I think it's like a proverb. It's worth writing down and reading it daily. There's so much in this statement because it helps us to remember we need to think of certain, way beyond our technologies and the stuff we make and our brands. Who are we innovating for? It really clarifies that relationship between the customer and the product. They're hiring it. They could hire a product, they could hire a service, they could hire software. They're hiring it to do what? Help them to accomplish a job. And once we understand the job and who we're innovating for, and we have our product in proper perspective, now we know to make something perfect, we must remove everything that makes it imperfect. Okay, so again, this is a very high level discussion of jobs to be done. After many years of obsessing about this topic, I did write a book on it earlier in the year. So we talked about the first 2 laws, actually ended up with 48. Anyway, so I did publish this earlier in the year. So we go to the first 4 laws of jobs to be done philosophy. When you begin with the idea that a customer seeks to accomplish a job, you'll begin to see them as being rational, even if they're making a decision that might not appear rational. So I have the position that all customers actually are rational. Anyway, so then we break it down to jobs, imperfections, products, product performance, value proposition, and then market research. Again, making it actionable. And with that concludes my introduction to the topic. Do we have any questions?
And
I think you can unmute yourselves.
Yeah, they can unmute. Let me just say, that was well done, Professor Burleson. I think you just gave a course at Duke University recently on this topic, didn't you?
I did. So I abbreviated. That was a couple hour session into our half hour here.
Well, it was really good. Let's see if there's any questions. And while people are thinking about the questions, let me just throw out one thought, and then we'll open it up to questions on this topic or the last 30 minutes, anything at all that you've got. One observation I would have that was very helpful when I read your book, which is a wonderful book, by the way. One of the things that I took away, you covered discovery interviews, and then, you and I have talked about this. What about preference interviews? And it's almost like if you got a really big market satisfaction gap, you got a big chisel and hammer to work with. There's a lot that needs to be removed before you're going to see David. That's a great opportunity to make a lot of progress. If it's a really small market satisfaction gap, it's either a little chisel or a file or maybe a little bit of sandpaper here. So it really tells you where to chop or where to be sculpting away for perfection on that job, which is, I just think it's a powerful concept. So thank you for that. Very, very good.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so one way to think about it is discovery interviews. We determine what all the rocks are, and as you just said, preference interviews, we determine which ones are the big ones and which ones are the little ones. And we'll
Exactly.
probably start working on those big ones.
You know, when I was a kid, they used to have paint by numbers for if you wanted to paint a picture or something. I guess this would be sculpt by numbers, right?
Right.
Well, let's see. Let's see if we've got any questions or observations on this topic or any other. Anybody have anything that I'd like to unmute and chime in on?
I've got a question, Dan, if we're
Yes, please. You go
So-
right ahead, Mark.
yeah, it's Mark here. So yeah, thank you very much, Scott, for your very quick introduction, Jobs to be Done. It's a subject which I've been trying to go deep dive into, and I've also read your book, so it's a very good read. I've got a question more about your slides, and maybe it's a blueprinting question in general, about how you framed the tent project. Because, and I forget the terms, and maybe you bring up the slide afterwards, but it was about why you use a tent as a project. To me, I'm just interested in why having the solution within the project title, is that a good idea or not? Yeah, because maybe what I would do is maybe experiences about hiking experience, a bit broader, but you've kind of narrowed it down to the tent. And I'm wondering what, and I guess it's a deliberate, and I just want to know what your thinking was behind it.
Yeah. All right. So for this, I want you to imagine a classic Venn diagram, two big circles, okay? And in one circle, it's everything about what the customer wants to accomplish. It's all their jobs. In the other circle, it's what you as your company, it's where you are interested in innovating. If you are making fabrics for tents, it's perfectly valid to study the job of shelter in a tent. Now, to your point, it was a deliberate decision. And you could study that, you could take it you could go a step higher and study the job of go camping or whatever. But what you need to appreciate then is you have gone a level higher. And so it's not that including the term tent is good or bad. It is a more specific context. It's a more specific context. You could have chosen a tarp. You could have chosen to leave it out altogether. So it's not good or bad. It's just at a certain level. Now, when folks are brand new in jobs to be done, and we want to get far away from any technology, there's a tendency to go a little bit too far away from the technologies. But we always want to keep in mind, what you don't want to do is you finish a project and find something that's very interesting, but not actionable. And so it's just, as soon as I put the phrase tent in there, I narrowed the job statement. It's not just camp in the woods, it's shelter with a tent in the woods. So it's not good or bad, it is narrower as soon as I included that. I could have also narrowed it further. I could have included, I could have included any context. I could have included in the summertime, maybe using the tent in the summertime versus winter might have something different. I could have included lots of different contexts but anyway, so there is a lot of confusion around that. Can we ever mention a solution? And you absolutely can, but it needs to be an intentional decision that you have narrowed this job, not absent-mindedly, but you have determined your scope of innovation includes a tent.
Yeah.
I
guess my also the question is I'm a big advocate of customer-led interviews as well. So, there could be a reason you are a tent supplier or you're a fabric supplier and you're talking about the particular tent, but then, they want to talk about something else because they have a larger problem. So I guess and I agree with you, there is that fine line between something that you want to understand intimately about the customer, but also something which is actionable. And that's one of the, let's say, internal struggles I've got with some of the businesses is that you're right, they go too far down the line and they tend to ignore the other jobs to be done, which we could help with, which are not necessarily product-based, but could be service-based, right? Down to Dublin's 10 types of innovation. They're going outside of that scope. So it's just continuous, not fight, but at least expanding the horizons to think about the innovation and jobs to be done in a broad enough manner, but not broad enough that it's not actionable. So we're always trying to, or I'm always trying to help the business, trying to toe that line. So yeah, I appreciate your insight.
So let me, if I can on this one, this is an interesting one. So if you went, you could go very broad in the jobs to be done, which is, all about the experience of backpacking. Or you could talk about the tenting because that's where your business is. And so the advantages and disadvantages are interesting. If you did the very broad one, it might lead you to work on hammocks or tarps or new backpacking fabric or new seating fabric. That's the advantage there. But on the other hand, maybe only 10% of the conversation might end up being about what you're really wanting to develop as your next product, which is the next tent. So you have this yin and yang. And I think one thing that Scott and I have noticed is when in doubt, it's sometimes nice on the first 2 or 3 discovery interviews, if you're not sure, to keep the scope a little bit broader and see if there's anything out there that we don't want to miss, and then we zoom in on it. So probably no one right or wrong, but there's advantages and disadvantages to both approaches, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I completely agree with you. And then as we talked about before is potentially what you could have is actually multiple blueprinting projects based on the initial conversations that you have around the market,
right?
Which obviously has its own implications and product timelines and so on. And that's happened before. Even coming into the preference interviews, understanding that actually these are split into different projects, and then we can go into the next stage with the proviso that sometimes you might need to go back to actually get the right statements to go back into the next part of the preference interview. So it's a bit of a juggling act, but that's something that we've had some experience with.
Yeah, great question / observation, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess there is the advantage of, and it goes back to what you just said, is that most of the time we have this very narrow view of how we can help our customers, and we usually just talk about that. By actually framing it in a job phrase or even as a discovery interview, we're seen as a supplier which listens. Mm-hmm. So you get this soft advantage of leapfrogging the other competition because we're talking about a subject which they're really interested in as well, almost part of their product development program. So there is that pro, going back to what Dan was talking about, of using the conversation as a way of seeing you as a different type of supplier, understanding what they want, which is not necessarily just tents which we provide. So that there is that ancillary benefit of having that conversation as well. So, but again, as you said, sometimes you can go a bit far. So with some businesses, we're trying to rein them a bit back and say, right, it was probably a bit too far, come back into your products. And yes, it's useful information, but you have to have something actionable as well.
Well, Mark, you're asking the right questions. You're asking the right question. Let me tell you about when I first started to wrestle with the exact thing you're referring to. I was with John Deere. I was just learning about jobs to be done. I'm trying to write my own statements. And I got to some statements about, so I had compact utility tractors, and they have mowers attached to them. They had mowers attached to them. And I was like, well, one of the things they do is they maintain these mowers and they sharpen the blades. Then I'm like, no, I can't say that because blades are technologies. And so then I'm wrestling with what I'm reading. What I'm reading at the time says I can't mention technologies. It's like, wait a minute, I've got these mower blades. So it turns out that it's just a matter of scope. It's just, I mean, you could, if you were working for John Deere or whoever, you're studying mowers, unless it's in scope that your next generation product is not going to have blades, it's okay to refer to the blades.
Yeah, I get
good
that.
stuff. Thank you, Mark. That's really good. Let's see if there's any other questions or observations on this topic or on anything else that you may have come here with a question in your back pocket.
Well, I want to put a bow on that last topic.
Yeah.
There's a particular category of jobs called consumption jobs. Consumption jobs. And these jobs specifically refer to how we consume a product. So if it was a tent, we purchase the tent, we set up the tent, we store the tent. It's all about the tent. Back to the mower. You store the mower, you purchase a mower. You maintain the mower, you upgrade the mower. So there's this whole category of jobs called consumption jobs. And in general, there's lots and lots of opportunity around consumption jobs. So that, if you look up that topic, which again, I obsess about in the book, that goes into some of what we're talking about too.
Good stuff.
All
Deep
right.
stuff. So, any other questions?
All right.
This leads really well into in 2 weeks from now on project scoping. And now you guys, I'll say one last thing and I'll stop talking here, but you guys have made me think about this a little bit. You know, we talked about a couple of job scopes, which is, you know, how could we improve the backpacking experience? Very, very broad, still job to be done. How could we improve sheltering while backpacking? Another very good job to be done. The fact of the matter is the vast majority of B2B companies are doing one of two things. One is, how can we make a better tent, right? And then worst of all, we came up with a new tent design. What do you think about it? So if we get into the jobs we've done, we're making some big improvements. Well, if that's it, thanks guys for coming. I think the project scoping will be really good. You want to go ahead and show them what we got here, Scott, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, let's look at what's coming up. So this was today, practical jobs to be done. And we're going to really continue. We're going to continue with jobs to be done as we look at how do you use this to write an excellent project scope. So we've got that 2 weeks from today. And it's great questions, Mark, because it's very consistent with exactly what your question was. Can we refer to the tent? Look what we have right here. Make sure we've chosen the correct level of breadth versus depth. And it's the interesting thing about determining the scope is I think one of the common errors for folks in new product blueprinting is just not taking enough time for it, just assuming it's going to be very easy. And really, do we mention the tent or do we not mention the tent? Those are some questions to wrestle with to write a good scope statement.
Should be good, clean fun in 2 weeks. And let me just give a 1 minute advertisement for November. We've got a brand new Blue tool that we've not used or talked about at all. It's something that you can use to entice people to say yes to your interviews and to dramatically increase your engagement in a marketplace. And so we've got one of our newer coaches helping us with that, and that Kelly Lawrence. And then later, we're going to talk about how blueprinting fits with strategic planning, because a lot of people have questions on that. We've got some pretty long-held views on the best way of tying those in. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll get a few minutes before extra time you'll probably find good use for. So thank you, Scott, for a great session today. And we'll see you all hopefully in a couple weeks, and let us know if you have questions before then, okay? All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dad.
Bye now.
Bye.